Yeah, we'll go ahead and get started. We want to thank you for coming out. We felt that we would get folks to come out this evening to hear kind of what's going on, what's being proposed, and to ask any questions, and hopefully get a better understanding of what the school district is looking at. And if you have any concerns after that, you can express those as well. And I'm going to, Nancy.
And I just wanted to thank Dietrich. Today was our meeting for our general membership, and I called him and asked if we could have the Cedar Rapids schools come and talk to our community so we know what is happening with the facilities master plan, because we all need to be informed about it and not the hearsay that is out there. So I want to thank everybody that's sitting up front here, because I know you guys have put in a lot of work. And I guess just to thank everybody for coming, and the folks coming in the audience. Our voices are really important in this process too. But I want everybody to have the correct information. And that was it, so.
All right.
If you would like to get started, I believe we designated, what, an hour? Dietrich? An hour?
Okay.
And then if there's some discussion, I'd ask everyone to be respectful to each other if there are some questions that come up.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm John Laverty, president of the school board, and this is my 11th year on the board, and have had a couple of my own children go through the district, and my wife, long history in the Cedar Rapids School District, and had the pleasure of getting to know Nancy Humbles as a colleague at the University of Iowa for many years, and was happy that she agreed to run for the school board. I know she's rolling her eyes a little bit, but we love having Nancy on the school board with us, and she brings a great perspective for us to think about. And so with that, maybe we can just go around and introduce and kind of your role with this whole process in the board.
I'm Trista Matternack. I'm the principal at Harrison Elementary.
I'm Maureen Abbott. I was a member of the facility master committee, as well as I'm on the audit committee of the school district.
I'm Darrell Spivey. I have an 18-year-old son at Washington High School, and I was on the committee that was a fun committee that put the big program in, and those new futuristic school practices. That was an exciting thing, and it seems like it's been well received. This is an interesting committee also.
Absolutely.
I'm Steve Graham. I'm a native Cedar Rapidian, born and raised, graduate of Jefferson High School, class of 1973. I used to swim. In fact, I have swum very recently up at the Jane Boy, used to be called the Jane Boy Community House. I'm not quite sure. They believe they call it Bender Pool now. But I love this town. I've been invested in this town for my life, with the exception of 7 years when I was the CFO, Chief Financial Officer with the Newton School District. But Lou Finch made me an offer I couldn't refuse to come back to my hometown. And so here I am in my 21st year as CFO with the Cedar Rapids Schools, and have been invested in this school community for a long time. And I feel very privileged and honored to be a part of our school organization, privileged and honored to be here tonight. So I look forward to our conversation. Thank you.
Good evening, my name is Mary Meisterling, and I've been on the school board for 16 years. I'm a very strong advocate of public education with excellent opportunities for each and every one of our students in our community. I raised 3 kids, graduated from Washington High School, and I have a grandson that will be starting a public school system next year. So thank you for having us tonight.
We can't have a board quorum.
We can't have a quorum here.
I understand. I'm going to go down to Metro graduation.
Sorry, Gary. This
That's
is
okay.
Gary. This is Gary Anhalt, one of our other board members, and since we haven't posted this as a public board meeting, we cannot have quorum, which is so.
Quite
Thank you.
comfortable, I'll get feedback.
No, you're good. You're absolutely good.
I'll see you on the
Thanks, Gary. We'll talk. Yep. All right. So what we thought we would do is, since we have 1 hour, we'll just spend roughly 10, 15 minutes at the very most going through some of the highlights, the background of what got us to this point and the process with the committee. And then I thought we'd just open it up to questions that you might have. The Gazette had a nice write-up about the forum that they sponsored last night. I don't know how many people had a chance to read that, but I thought they did a pretty fair, balanced job of reporting what we discussed last night. And they've put that video out on their website too, so if you wanted to go out and see the whole discussion, you could certainly do that. One of the things, and Dr. Buck does send his apologies, our superintendent had meant to be here tonight, but he came down in the middle of the night with that nasty flu and has been in bed all day, and from what I understand is still will probably be in bed tomorrow. So he does send his regrets and was looking forward to this. So one of the things that we in the district have been doing is really working on a proactive vision for the district. We've recognized that there are some issues in terms of enrolling out of the school district, some issues with changes in our demographics, some issues with some underrepresented populations, low-income students that are on free and reduced lunch, some of our minority populations that the achievement gap is still there, and we're not doing all that we can be doing to meet that, we don't think. And so some of those things, along with 7 years of subpar funding from the state of Iowa for K-12 education. And in 2012, so this was after the 2008 floods, 2012, we had people coming in from the government saying, you really need to look at your ADA compliance. So are your schools accessible? And so we had Shive Hattery, an architecture engineering firm in town, come in and look at all of our buildings. They worked with the school district staff. They went out, looked at every building. What would it take to get those buildings up to ADA compliance, get them so that they're more comfortable buildings in terms of heating and cooling and windows and repairs and whatever else, because we do have a fairly old stock for the most part in our school district in these buildings. So they put out a list of all of those buildings and what it would take financially to get them up to speed. That wasn't to make them 21st century, more modern buildings or anything like that. That was just to get them accessible and up to par, I would say. So all of those things, looking at demographics, looking at budget trends, looking at where our buildings were, the board then last year said, we really need to have a closer look at this and how would be the best way to do that. And what we decided as a board was that we wanted a community conversation, but to do that, because there's so much information that's involved with this, we really needed some people that were going to be dedicated to spend, I don't know how many hours exactly you all spent, but it was a lot of hours, and many, many nights, many, many days, trips to other school districts, etc., becoming experts in different areas and then coming together, and I'll let them explain what they did with that process. But that process started about 18 months ago, and it's been culminating in the last few months we've had about 5 report outs at our public board meetings to where the committee was and the direction they were leaning. So again, the board has asked the superintendent, administration, this committee to come back with what's the proposal, what's going to be the best thing that we can do given our budget situation, which Steve Graham, our CFO, will kind of explain a little bit more about. What can we do as a school district? And they came forward with this proposal. And I think I'll stop there for a minute, and I don't know if Steve or some folks on the committee want to kind of describe that process that you all went through for the last 18 months. Do you have any?
Oh, I'll start, because I'm glad Dr. Buck isn't here, because we did fight over a microphone at one point at one of our meetings. When we started, when I was asked to be on the committee, I didn't know what to expect. It was called the Facilities Committee, and I didn't know. And it took, as John said, I think we met for a year and a half. We would meet not during the summer, but usually about once a month for 2.5 hours, I think it was. It was a very, the committee was full of opinionated, unshy people, I guess you would agree with that didn't mind speaking their mind. And there have been accusations, not accusations, sounds, well, okay, accusations, can't take it back. Anyway, that we were a rubber stamp to the administration. I personally enjoyed the raucous meetings sometimes, but I came from that background, it didn't bother me. But as we started out, we looked at what it would cost to bring the buildings up to current code compared to, and Steve will talk, he's more articulate about money than me, but what it would cost to bring all these buildings up, not only ADA compliant, which is personally very important to me, but also security for our kids, and also the new century of these kids, well, not even these kids, even, you know, children that aren't born yet, well, go to school. And so as we talked, you know, we had the elementary schools and we had the junior high and the high schools. Money has gone to the high schools and the junior highs. The elementaries, 21 right now, all of them except maybe a couple were in need of a lot of repairs. Money's tight, it's kind of like at our houses, you know, the price of hay goes up, I know from experience, so then you gotta figure out, okay, what are you gonna do with the herd? But that's the same thing happened with the schools. And the end result was we started looking at larger elementary schools. The district had told us that they were not interested in purchasing other additional land, which I think is nice. I mean, because that gets dicey and messy, and no one comes out happy when you start going into condemnation and things like that. So we knew we had various sites around the city. We also started talking about different sizes of elementary schools, and that took us on what John talked about, the tours. We toured Linn-Mar School District. Some went to College Community. We even sent a group down to Kansas City to tour some districts that had these 600 student buildings. And I don't know about you folks, if any of you have ever been in the big buildings like Linn-Mar has or College Community has that are 600 students. I was shocked because I always liked a smaller school, I always thought. I'm not an educator, I have to tell you that. But when I walked into Lynn Grove Elementary, it was just a beautiful building. And I left there and I said to Jim, who was also on our committee, this is why this district is losing kids to other districts through open enrollment. And why can't our kids have a facility like this? So that's what we started moving toward, and that's probably more than what I think, you know, I always talk more than I should. So I'm going to give it over to a principal here, who also, we often sat at the same table, but.
Is there a place you want me to go with this, or just share my?
Yep, you can just share what you want.
So
This is unscripted.
I joined the committee for two purposes. One was to make sure that Harrison stakeholders, because Harrison has such a heart in this community, make sure they had a voice. The second was to bring experience from another district in which I spent 5 years as a principal of a very brand new building, to be able to share that experience with the team also. There's a gigantic difference in the things that we can provide for kids when there's a 77-year time frame between when one building is built and the other building was built. It's just astonishing to see the differences and to be able to feel those differences, but to know that our kids right now that I serve at Harrison will never have that opportunity. And I think that's the part that hurt the most was, you know, in talking with people that save Harrison, save Harrison. Yes, Harrison is a very amazing building. It's beautiful, but it has served its purpose for 77 years. And we spend so much time at Harrison fixing things that we can't get ahead. I mean, a prime example of that is we get PEPAL money, you know, that comes every year with certain things that are fixed. We have $40,000 right now to replace flooring. That's not enough to do the whole school. So So we have to pick and choose which classroom gets to be upgraded and which classroom has to stick with the decades-old carpet that's been there for a very long time. So that's just a tiny little example of kind of what we're dealing with at Harrison right now. Literal exploding toilets because plumbing is so bad. That has to be fixed right now while kids are trying to learn. Those types of things. I mean, we are doing the best we can. Our teachers are amazing, our students are amazing, and they're performing fairly well given those circumstances. But coming from a brand new school where kids have had the opportunity to be collaborative, to work in a space that is state-of-the-art, that is built for 21st century learning, and that is built to be preparing our kids to be future ready, is just, it's so remarkably different, those two.
I entered the committee for a variety of reasons also. One was I'm a neighborhood school guy. I was one of the people that fought to keep polk open. I found that I had a great experience, as I mentioned, on the other committee that was involved with newer, more effective methods to train kids, and the kids are, and on top of it, the kids like it. I wanted to make sure the tough questions were asked. One of them was in the paper today, white flight. Okay? You can't deal with it until you get on the top of the table. And Brad Buck was willing to do that. I have a lot of respect for that guy, and I hope you all get a chance to meet him sometime. I think I lived up to my commitment to asking the hard questions. And I was hoping that the decisions would take people into account, but also what data do we have to make the decisions by. And some of the data was shocking. I don't know how many of you have seen the summarized report, but there's one place on that report where it shows a graph over time and the costs of the money we have coming in and whether or not we're going to be able to maintain or get better. Boom, it goes like this and then it just drops through the floor. And there's a point where it crosses a line which says we can no longer afford to do business the way we're doing business. So here we got kids to deal with, and what do we do that's best for kids? And how do we make those decisions? I will assure you that there were a lot of opinions of people, and they had all sorts of different backgrounds. And I think we ended up, not totally right here when it was done, but kind of in the range of what should happen in the future. And the decisions were fundamentally data-based. You don't like to have dollars drive everything. A lot of the conversation was golly, if we cut down the number of schools, how are we going to deal with the kids that get cut? How do you put them together? One of the things, a lot of discussion was on where are the kids now? And we liked the idea, although we looked into the numbers, and there was a little bit more mythology there than we would have expected. For example, walking to school. How many of you guys walked to school when you went to school? Okay. Well, I think it came out to like only 20 to 25% of the kids at elementary level walk to school. Was that about right, Steve?
24%.
So it was important to look at the numbers and see what's going on. Do I agree with everything? No, but I think they're pointed in the right direction. I think, would it work as is? Yes. But it won't work unless the community's behind it. I've been a strong proponent that until we reach the people and have honest, open discussions, hang it up. It's just an exercise. And I've been pleased that those conversations have begun to occur. And please make sure that you can find a point where you can walk away satisfied that you got the straight story, that you asked the stuff that might be under here, and that you can say yes. Or how do we change it?
But the idea is something has to change.
There's
we
the point.
believe.
I think we talked about a lot of people have mentioned sort of the financial undergirding of this and this financial cliff, and Steve over here, it calls himself the bean counter, and he does a great job at it for many, many years with the school district, and can rattle off all those data.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John. Before I get into the bean counting, first of all, I recognize the importance of counting beans. You know, we need to keep track of the economics. We need to keep track of the costs and those kinds of things. It's not flashy, but it's necessary. It's not something that people want to talk about initially, but eventually it becomes part of the conversation. It just does. Before I even get into that, I just want to tell you a little bit about how I feel about our leadership in our school district right now, because I've been around this business for 31 years, and Brad Buck is my 5th superintendent that I've worked for. You know, this conversation that we're engaged in right now that's 18 months old is just the latest version of a conversation that's been going on for years and years in this community. I came here in 1997, and we had a difficult time trying to get a local option sales tax passed, which failed dismally. I felt really bad about that back in 1999. We had, at that time, back in 2000, the biggest bond issue ever passed in the state of Iowa, 73%. December the 12th, 2000, 73% voted for a bond issue, and we did many wonderful things with those resources. And we've had our ups and downs over the years, but we have always had, since I've been on board, we have always had this nagging, slow erosion of our infrastructure because we have a lot of buildings to maintain. We have 21 elementary buildings, we've got 6 middle school buildings, we've got 3 conventional high schools, and we have Metro High School. That's a lot of brick and mortar in this community with resources that don't quite stack up. And what it does over time is it erodes our buildings slowly over time. We do the best we can with the resources that we have. So we came to the board back in 2013 with a report on our facilities, and we did very much the same work that we're doing today. But the difference between 2013 and today is this. We have a leader in Brad Buck who is willing to push the envelope and to bring questions in front of our community that previous leadership weren't willing to do. We're having a conversation about closing 8 elementary buildings because Brad Buck and the Board of Education behind him are supporting the conversation. These aren't easy discussions. They're not easy at all. If we have 21 elementary buildings that cost us significant resources, public resources that continue to dry and get more and more difficult to find, we have to do something different. We had to do something different back in 2013. But when it came to the point where we began to even have the notion of naming schools, we didn't do it. And we're doing it now. We're doing it now. And these kinds of conversations that are taking place tonight and yesterday over at the library are healthy for our community. They may not be all kinds of conversations you want to hear. There are things that in this conversation that are not pleasant, but they are so necessary. And I'm hoping that before we're done tonight, you understand maybe a more compelling reason as to why we're engaged in this conversation in the first place. And the second thing I'll say about Dr. Buck, and then I'll get into the beans, is this. Dr. Buck is in your face about everything, including race and socioeconomic factors in our community. He is willing to talk about where we're failing. He's willing to say our schools are not doing as well as they should be. He's willing to say that Linn-Mar and college community schools are outperforming us before we even get engaged in the conversation on facilities. He is working hard, as well as our board, on many facets, way beyond facilities. But facilities is a part of our conversation tonight. So, at any rate, I don't want to come off as preaching, and sometimes I do. But I feel very passionate about this work. It's crucial work for our community. I'm invested in this community, as you are too. And so, well, anyway,
Can I throw one other thing
Yeah.
on there? That Steve was heading down that track of things that aren't discussed. You know, I came back, I was away from Cedar Rapids about 20 years and came back. And I left at 18, so I didn't really even understand the city. But one of the things that's driven Cedar Rapids, it appears, for years is they're proud of how we don't, how we skimp on not asking people to pay taxes. Well, if you look at the school districts that we're all looking at and going, wow, those are neat. You realize they tax more? So there's been a big period of time, and I don't know if this is another one, I don't know if this really hit the table or not, but there's been a period of time when we plodded along, so proud that we were charging less on taxes. And look where we are. I don't know how many dollars that would amount to, but it'd be a bunch. So if you always do what you always did, you always get what you always got. And we've got ourselves here. A lot of things have to change.
So I feel compelled to say something too. I've been on board 16 years, and I started with Dr. Finch, and have gone through the 5 superintendents as well. And our board, when I started, wanted to share information about our schools and the achievement gap, and he didn't want to do it. And the next one didn't want to do it, and the next one didn't want to do it, and the next one didn't want to do it, and Brad Buck did it. He's telling the truth about what's happening in our schools and the disparate proficiencies, and our goal when we hired him was to close that gap. And we said, you come up with a plan that closes that gap, and this is part of that plan. So I just had to set the stage with that background.
we have our newest school building, Viola Gibson. Anybody know how old Viola Gibson is? It opened in 2002. Okay, 16 years old. That's our newest building we have in the fleet of our 21 elementary buildings. And I'm going to try to paint a picture that you can see visually in your mind, because we don't have anything on the high-tech side to show you what a chart looks like here. But if you can think about 21 elementary buildings all lined up, and that all of them but 3, Grant, Hiawatha, and Gibson, all the rest will take more than 50% of the value of rebuilding a new building than to repair the ones that we have today. Those are 18 of our 21 elementary buildings. And not only is it just a little over 50%, it's a lot over 50%. In fact, a lot of our buildings are over 70%. To repair those buildings would be 70% of what we would invest if we simply built a new building. Think about that. When you're thinking about investing money into a house, and it's going to take you 70% of the value of that house to make it right, and you could spend 30% more and build a brand new one, what would you do? What would you do? You see? And when you think about it in terms like that, you begin to think, you know what, maybe there's something different about this that we could do. So that's a capital infrastructure exercise. And hopefully you understand the picture I'm trying to paint. So now, if we were to look at operating those school buildings, we have personnel, we have teachers, paraprofessionals, secretaries, administrators, principals. We pay the utilities, we pay the gas, the lights, the electricity, the water, all those bills. Those are expensive things. We spend millions of dollars. We spend $200 million a year on those things in the Cedar Rapids School District. And if we had fewer, larger elementaries, if we went from 21 to 13, and 13 is a sweet spot that has a story all by itself that came from the committee work. But if we had 13 elementaries with the capacity to serve our children in the elementary grades the same as the 21, we would save every year $3 million in resources. And we could turn those resources back into additional teachers and services and to maintain a quality of educational program for all our kids. See? And because we're in an environment where resources are so finite, so limited, Des Moines, the capital, we're not expecting a whole lot more resources in the future as we've had in the recent past. And we've had 7 consecutive years, 7, of budget reductions because of very small rates of growth in state funding for schools in the state of Iowa. It's a reality. And I'm a bean counter. I'm right in the weeds with this one. I can tell you about it because I live it, eat, and breathe it every day. And so we are compelled to think about doing something different. And so we gathered this committee of, we started off with 100 people, and we really ended with probably 60 people who were dedicated, were attending those final meetings. Look, when you've got a series of meetings over 18 months, it's hard to keep people who are really busy with their lives involved and engaged. But we did. So,
I want to make sure we have enough. Yeah. So finances, definitely. There's not a whole lot of choices. What the board asked Dr. Buck and the administration of this committee to do is look at ways to get this done without raising property taxes, if we can help but do that. So the SAVE tax is a sales tax. We already have it. It's expected to expire in 2029. And what we're hoping, and we're working with the legislature along with, it's probably one of the top priorities of every school district in Iowa, is to get this extended for at least another 20 years. This sales tax, this is a big shopping area. There's lots of people that come in here. So other people are going to help bring money in to pay for this. Because the other thing that's going to happen, in addition to these elementary schools, is about another decade or two from now, probably, we're going to start looking back at the middle schools. We've got a lot of historic middle schools, some newer ones. If you look out at Taft, the bubbles and all that, they have some issues as well that are we're putting Band-Aids on right now. Those are going to have to be fixed at some point and updated, and that will probably take a bond vote. So that is something down the road. So instead of doing bond votes on this, if we can get that sales tax extended, that's what we want to try and do. And one of the things I know they all looked at was how many students do we have kind of expect in the future. And they had come up with this 600 student elementary. And really what it is 4 sections, 4 classes in each of the grade levels in that school building. So 4 first grades, 4 second grades and things. And does the committee maybe want to talk about that? Why did you come up with 600 kind of as the sweet spot in the class, in the school size?
This is my favorite part because I came from a building that was almost 600. We reached 535. But as a principal, it was much easier for me to run a larger building than it was for me to run the small building of Harrison. And some of those reasons are with increased size, you would increase your full-time equivalents of specialists. So art, music, PE, and media teachers would then be full-time in one school. Right now, I share a media specialist with 2 other schools. I share a music teacher with 2 other schools. I share a PE teacher with 1 other school. So those specialist teachers will become a full-time member of your staff. There's a lot more community building that can happen than with that large school. So we chose 600, and I didn't happen to be on that committee. I don't know if either of you were on that. But I believe it was just for resource purposes. When you can have that many more kids, it just allows you to keep people full-time in a school.
Yeah, and I think Dr. Buck put it well last night. He said we're building these schools for every child. So if we have children with special needs, children that are from English language learner backgrounds, their families are from other countries or whatever, we can bring them all into their home school. We don't have to, as we do now, take them across town to different programs and bus them around that way. So hopefully we'll get more of the students into their local elementary schools under this program, which is kind of exciting. As we toured, some of the school board members, I'm sure the committee can attest to this, when we toured some of the new buildings like in College Community and Linn-Mar, wide hallways, probably at least twice as wide as most of our elementary schools. They had gymnasiums about 3 times bigger than our current gymnasiums. They had separate entrances for wings like the gym and the cafeteria wings, so the public could come in on the weekends and use them for all kinds of different activities on the evenings. Kind of like what we partnered with Harrison and the city on a few years ago and built the Northwest Recreation Center over there with Harrison. So we partnered For a little bit more money, we made the gymnasium pretty big. There's some meeting rooms out there, and there's a kitchen area so they can cater in and have events. And if you start thinking in terms of that, it kind of gets exciting. We talked with a school district down in Aldine, Texas, in the Houston area. And for years now, they've had the community college actually working with the local school district in these buildings. They have the media centers, so there's computers and things all set up. They have separate entrances. Community college comes in nights and weekends and works with the adults, the parents. Some of these parents did not have a great time in school. Their skill set for getting jobs and understanding technology and just interviewing maybe aren't as strong as they could be. So the community college is doing job kinds of classes, parenting classes, all kinds of different things with them in that area, while the children, they're getting meals, they're getting academic support, they're having recreation and things just down the other side of the building. But what a powerful thing for those students to see, mom and dad or whoever the adult is in their life also saying education is really important. So they're doing that as a family unit, and that happens evenings and weekends. So you really start to see opportunities for these buildings to become community hubs. We have a lot of excitement out at Hoover right now. They're thinking about community schools. They've got a big English language learning program out there. Lots of folks that have come in from other countries that struggle a little bit assimilating into American society and language and what is this American education thing, and again, like many people, food and clothing and all those other things, social services as well. So they're talking about it as a school. How do we make this the hub for those families, because that's what's important in their neighborhood. So the one thing that we dedicated as a board moving forward with all of this, and I think the paper got it pretty well, we've dedicated ourselves, and this is what we'll vote on potentially as early as Monday, is that this is a framework plan, 21 elementary schools currently. So whether you're in a facility that is going to remain and be rebuilt on that same site or repurposed or torn down, whatever it is, sold, closed, whatever it is, those 21 neighborhoods, along with the city, along with community services and nonprofits, along with the neighbors, along with parents, staff, and students, along with whoever wants to be involved that's a stakeholder that's close to that neighborhood, we will have 21 different discussions. We have this in the resolution that we'll vote on Monday. We also are working with our legal counsel and the city's legal counsel on a formal memorandum of understanding that will actually lay out formally, legally, that we will work with the city in this process, arm in arm, going through in the implementation for this 15-year period. So the first schools that are slated this is actually done in tiers or phases, so it's not all at once. So the first schools, we would start having discussions maybe as early as next month. This would be Coolidge, and then Jackson Elementary, that would be new facilities out on the west side, and then Truman on the west side would be closing. So it's kind of 3 schools together, 2 new schools, 1 close. And we take a little pause after we do that build out, and we're going to ask the community and the neighbors and the city, did we do a good job? Did you get the information to us that was important? Did we listen? Did this building meet the needs of what you thought it was going to be? Are there things that we could do better? So we'll take a little pause, and we'll say, okay, now we're going to move on to phase 2, and there's another set of buildings. And then phase 3, all the way out about 15 years is what it ends up being. And the board will actually have a procedure in our operations and our board policies. They'll say, we mandate that we have to stop as a district, as a board, every 5 years. And we're going to take a look at these facilities and where we're at. Because things will change. I mean, we'll get started on those first few buildings, and Lord knows, I mean, the economy in Iowa, we could get a great employer coming to Cedar Rapids, and all of a sudden we've got this new boom of families moving in here. The opposite could happen too. We could get all kinds of different things happening in this community, and that could impact this. And we aren't mind readers out 10, 15 years. We're doing pretty good at predicting 3, 4, 5 years out, and that's about where we're going to start with that phase 1. So as we move through these 15 years, if we need to make adjustments, it's built into the plan that we'll vote on. So I think in honor of time and wanting to engage and ask questions, maybe we'll stop there. Does that seem fair to everyone, and then we'll just answer the questions that you have, because I know there are a lot of them.
John, before we do that, I want to make sure, because I think it's an important part of the puzzle, or what we looked at when we talk about this district losing children to other districts through white flight, which I don't doubt. Finally, it's above the table when we're talking about it. What happens? It's not just that they're gone. They take their money that this district receives with them to another district. So it's not only the children we lose, it's the funding.
It's like $6,000 a head.
That this district pays to them.
And that's like, 1,000 to 1,200 kids.
We have a net loss of 910 students a year and growing to other school districts. And we pay about $6.5 million a year for that. It's a big ticket.
Can I say one other thing, because it's timely, and I don't know if I'm supposed to.
No, you can say whatever you want to say, Darrell.
Darrell Spivey, the citizen. In the legislature right now, there is a move to, I guess the term vouchers makes, okay? There is a big push to give vouchers. That's all more money out the door. So as far as those of you who are politically involved, and those of you that aren't, please get politically involved. That's a huge issue. That's just more money. And this country, in my opinion, was built on public schools. And that's more money out the door. So, just an aside, but please track that and
This is a good
make
point.
your calls.
Yep. All right, questions,
Comments?
comments?
Well,
Yeah.
I guess my question is, the people that y'all chose to do this study, how did you choose them? Because a lot of times people get more than one opinion, where we might could save money. The other thing is kind of two-part, I might not get to talk.
That's okay.
But the other thing is, when we're talking about bridging the gap, and if we're working on bridging the gap, are the schools that you mentioned that you're gonna work on first, are those the ones that have the worst gap? Because what my concern is that, if we need to bridge the gap, in predominantly minority neighborhoods, then I would think that those would look at buildings that maybe needed to be taken care of first.
I can address the membership. I could probably address them both, but I'll do the membership piece, and I can stop there and let somebody else answer the second part of that. When we began thinking about a committee, we began asking for names. And everybody had the opportunity to give us a name. We collected names, hundreds of names. And I phone called hundreds of people. And I was turned down by more people than said yes, time after time after time. And so the first thing I learned was, it's hard to find people willing to commit time and energy to volunteer. Number one. We wanted to find a broad cross-section of people who were willing to spend time. And we didn't know at the time this is going to be an 18-month journey. We were thinking 12 months when we were initially telling folks it's a 12-month commitment. You're probably going to be looking at 15 to 20 meetings that are in the evening, a couple of hours each time. You'll be reading in between. You can see when you're telling that story, people listen to that and they think, wow, it's a lot of commitment. But through all of it, we found 100 people, roughly, that started on our journey with us. There were probably, I would say, maybe 40%, 35 to 40% of those names are people that are employees of the school system in some shape or form, and then others that are in the community representing different areas of our community. And so that is really kind of how it went. I have to tell you right now, I am not all that well connected. But I became more connected through the process of learning about who is doing what in the community and calling people up and asking them. So, it is a difficult thing, a challenging thing to find people who are willing to volunteer. And so, I mean, that's the story there.
Okay, actually, you didn't answer me one of the questions, because I asked, how did you come across the decision that who was going to look at all the schools? You didn't answer that. Plus,
Who was going to look at all the schools? On the committee?
You had somebody come in and look at all the schools and
Shy
gave
Battery.
you,
Oh.
and gave you.
Oh, the financials?
Yeah, plus I
Oh.
asked the question, you know, that you had mentioned that Bunch had said that what he wanted to do is.
Okay.
is,
Let me try and
close-
answer.
close it. Let me finish the other one, so make sure you get it right. Close the gap. So when you're looking at closing that gap, you know, how did you come across a decision of what schools to start at?
Sure.
You know, because my concern is if there's a big gap in the minorities areas, it would look like you would start there to close the gap.
Yeah.
Because we're usually the last to get something done.
Well, first question, I will say, the district, and again, starting in 2012, we had Shive Hattery, which is the district's architecture and engineering firm of record. So they're our engineering and architecture firm. This is what they do. They work on buildings and facilities, and they estimate bids and evaluate boilers and roofs and all that kind of stuff. We have had them work with our district staff that help do maintenance and facility work on all of our buildings, and they spent, I don't know how many months, but months and months and months going through each one of our buildings. So the report that Steve talked about, 2013, and I think we can show you a graph of it. He said, lays out every one of those buildings and says, okay, this is to get them up just to code with ADA and basic, solid heating and cooling systems and windows and things. It's going to be this much money for each one. The one that costs the absolute most money, that's in the absolute worst shape, is Coolidge Elementary, by far, costs the most money. So I believe when they went through and they said, okay, as we looked at these different buildings, it would make sense to start with the one that's in the worst shape, to get that one started and fixed first. So Coolidge and Jackson, and then Truman is out there between. So they're kind of in, all of these are kind of in threes. So the other thing that happened, you talked about the achievement gap and where minority populations are, where students are in general. Our district is now about 50% roughly free and reduced lunch. So when I started on the board, it was probably in the 30-some% range. So poverty in our school district has been on the rise. And this is, I live on the southeast side. The efforts to work in the Wellington Heights area and some of the single-family housing projects and things that are going on. We've seen changes in demographics across the school district. So we don't have just concentrations in this one school or that one school per se. So you've got, say, Pierce Elementary. When I first came to Cedar Rapids 30 years ago, Pierce Elementary was primarily middle class and mostly white. They have a significant population of minority students out there and some low-income families out there now that they didn't have 20 years ago. So this, all I'm saying is this is spread out, not just concentrated. People on the committee, as I understand, I didn't sit on the committee, we got the regular reports from it. As they looked at the heat maps and concentrations where all the students were, and they looked at where the needs were, they started to make some decisions. So I don't want to name names and all this stuff, but there were folks that were on the committee that came from different backgrounds that were African American that came to the table and said, this is a priority for us. The core neighborhoods, for instance, Johnson Elementary is a school that's really important to our community, has a long history. It sits right in the middle of an area that has high poverty, high minority population, and families sometimes struggle in that area. And it's successful. It's a magnet school now that we've got all kinds of really neat things going on there, and the students, the achievement levels are doing well. Let's try and save that school. And so some of those types of discussions, as I understand it, happen, and you all in the committee can
Absolutely.
say whatever you
I'll
want.
be glad to step in here,
Yeah.
because I had a little tantrum that night when we were talking about Johnson Elementary, because I have roots in Wellington Heights, and was aware of Johnson. And from the very beginning, because what John talked about, the heat map, they can tell where are all these kids around the building. I mean, if that alone guaranteed a new building, Johnson would get it at the top of the list because they have a great concentration of children who live close to that school. But Johnson, if you're familiar with it, is on a very small piece of land. I think it's 1.5 acres. I mean,
It's less than
small.
an acre, yeah.
Is it less than, okay, it is
Yep.
small, and you gotta figure, you got the building, you got the playground. What they wanted to do, and what will happen according to the plan, is that that will have a new school there, 450
Yeah.
students.
It
not-
won't be as big because it can't build up that high.
But
It
I
can
was
build
against
different.
that.
Right.
On that memorable meeting, because I was worried that, well, first of all, looking at the way Cedar Rapids built their schools, I figured it followed housing. And now, that may be right or wrong, I don't know. But, like, oh, here was there would be Viola Gibson, suddenly there were houses around there, or whatever. And they became these neighborhood schools. And what happens, to me, it would seem, is that sometimes that school may be committed just to those little kids that live there. And what about the kids in Wellington Heights who may not have the kind of PTA group to support them and buy all this fancy stuff for their school? I didn't want the idea of our kids having to stay in our neighborhood. Now, maybe that's right or wrong, I don't know, but it just bothered me a lot. And I thought, well, if it's good enough for the kids at Coolidge or Pierce, whatever, to go to 600 school, why can't our kids do that? Why can't the neighborhood be bigger than Wellington Heights? And therefore, you'd have a better cross-section of kids. And I talked a lot that night, and finally, I was outvoted. I mean, it's democracy, and that's the way it is. I've lost a lot of things in my life, and that's the way it is. Although I finally decided, I talked to Dale Todd, I talked to various people in the neighborhood and said, am I all wrong here? Am I wrong? And they convinced me, and I'm comfortable with the idea that Johnson would have a 450 building. I told them, I said, right now we have the best of intentions. That Johnson kids would have this, be on the same par, smaller school, but have a new school. I just want to make sure in the future that maybe Johnson gets forgotten. But that's once you get older, you realize, oh, I can't control a lot anymore, especially this stuff that's going to happen in the future. So I suppose it's on all of us to make sure that doesn't happen. But that's one of the decisions we made. I mean, I don't know if that answers your
I
question.
think it doesn't.
No.
I don't think it does, so, do you think it does answer your question?
Because I think that what we need to do, what you need to do is invest in the children somewhere to bring them up. Because when you mentioned the two schools you mentioned, Prairie and Hiawatha, that's what they did. They invested in those children in those communities. That's why, you go to Prairie and they give the kids computers and whatever else. So.
You're
my
talking
concern-
instruction, right?
Yeah.
That's what you
Yeah,
mean,
well,
instruction.
that's where I want to bridge the gap at.
So we've got two different issues.
Because
Yeah.
that's where I want to bridge the
Yeah.
gap at, to make sure that things like that happen. Because, as being the black man, and I'm probably about as old as y'all, or might be older than some of y'all. But, I watched what happened in a lot of schools where our books weren't as good as somebody else's books.
Right.
We didn't get the same stuff that everybody else got, So therefore, trying to bridge that gap and integrate the schools and all that, I watched all that happen. So I guess my concern is that if Bunch is talking about bridging the gap, that's the gap that I want to close.
So just one thing about this, in the school funding formulas in Iowa, the money that we're talking about going towards facilities under Iowa law, we can't spend any of that towards the stuff that you're talking about in terms of staff and instructional materials and all those kinds of things. That's a whole separate pot of money that comes into the.
Not really.
No, it
because
actually,
when
it is.
When you improve a school,
Yeah.
then people want to go to that school.
Well, what
And
he's
that
saying
building.
is this the law.
Yeah, so what you're talking about.
No, I'm not talking about materials, but I'm saying is that when you improve a school.
Right.
Then the people in the area and stuff will invest more in that area.
Absolutely.
You know,
That's what we
good
wanna
stuff.
do.
That's what we want to
Exactly
do.
what we wanna
Yep.
do.
Like, that's
Leave.
what I hear Mr. Aaron saying is that if part of the goal is to, you know, shut down some schools,
Mhm.
so then you can combine them, and by combining them, then you get more instructors, and then you also have better facilities. If we're trying to truly address the achievement gap, how is it that these specific first-tiered elementary schools are a part of addressing these?
Because they have the highest needs in terms of the building, the facility themselves. If we don't start with them first, we have to do a lot more money now to just try and keep them going before we get to the next building. So whether it's, I mean, this is going to be a 15-year process, okay? So there's phases. So Coolidge and Jackson and Arthur are in that first group. We're going to see how those go. And then in the second tier, Harrison, Cleveland, Pierce, Erskine, and Wright are in there. And then the third tier, so this will be like in the last 5 years, Hoover, Johnson, Grant, Viola Gibson, and Hiawatha.
And part of that, just to jump in, the way those tiers were built is that something has to happen with those kids for the schools that are being renovated. So like when Harrison comes up, we can't be in our building while they build our new building. So our kids have to go somewhere. Well, I would see Jackson as a perfect, you know, one of those schools for some of our kids to go to for that time, because they've just been renovated. They're larger than the current the buildings that we have right now, so they could house some of our kids while that renovation takes place. So it's like a big puzzle piece of trying to figure out how we're going to move
We only want
kids
kids
and get them
to
back.
we only want kids to move once
Right.
in this whole process. Okay.
I want to go back to that gap thing just one last time, because I'm just thinking there's a part of that is missing, and I'm going to try to fill it just a little bit here. Facilities alone are not going to solve the achievement gap. They won't. Facilities are needed, but they're not alone going to solve the achievement gap. And the one thing that Dr. Buck is doing, and supported by the board, is identifying the problems we're having, socioeconomic, racial differences in student performances in the gaps. And we now know more about where the gaps really are. And the gaps can be reduced by the quality of instruction that goes on within our buildings today, even old buildings. But everything equal, if we're teaching the best that we can to reduce that gap, have the best teachers, they will teach better in a new school than they will in an old school where we've got issues with heating and plumbing and ventilation, those kinds of things. So I hope that makes sense.
Well,
Does that
actually,
make
that's
sense?
what I said. Is when you take a building and you renew the building, you know, you have better teachers that want to come and teach that. They feel more secure, you know, in that building, you know, and they work harder at teaching the kids that will improve their gap.
The other thing, this plan is expected to save about $3 million in the operations fund, which does go to all that direct instructional stuff down in the classrooms. So that's the other part of this. Oh, I'm sorry, Bernard.
I was going to say the traffic, when you use the word disparagement, you are, just by using that language, you're implying someone is getting more. Just by even when you say there's disparagements in the Cedar Rapids School District, it's implying that other students are getting more. That's what that language means. And my primary concern is about the quality of instruction, the amount of money is spent, the amount of resources that go to kids. My next concern, when you build schools, you need to go beyond the ADA. You need to go to universal design. You need to go beyond legal. And it's cheaper to do it new, which I'm sure you all.
The ADA friendly.
The ADA generally is the minimum of the law.
Yeah.
You have to go beyond that.
The spirit of the law.
It's the spirit of it. You have to go beyond that if you want to be successful. I'm just suggesting that you go beyond.
And that young man came to our board meeting that you were at the last time and talked about that. Yep.
Yeah.
And let me get my thoughts here. Now, I'm going to ask a couple of questions. Now, first off, I'm curious to how y'all feel that new buildings is gonna stop white flight. And the next thing I'm gonna ask you, did you recognize any of the race-neutral language that was used, that people been talking to you, and could y'all tell me what it, but could you tell us some of the race-neutral language that was used, and do y'all recognize it?
Do you mean, Bernard, just to clarify, so I understand what you're talking about, the race neutral, that they would not talk about race, they'd use.
Well, it's a roundabout way of talking about race, but they still talking about it.
Like
Right.
when they say, I want my kids to stay in my neighborhood, is that what you mean?
That's what I'm talking
No,
about.
that, plus the why did you move?
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and some other language, I just said some other language that you catch in the other language.
I started chasing that down. When I got on the committee, they said, go out and talk to people and see what they say. So I started doing
Yeah.
that. And what I heard was code words. It's another way to
Well,
look at it.
just give me one that was. that you
Those
rec-
kids. I don't want my kids with those kids.
That's one of them,
Okay.
okay?
So who are those kids, we would ask?
But sometimes I'd hear about a story, so I never talked to the person face to face. I couldn't trace them down, but it was this, well, I can get a better deal, here. Some of it was moving for sports reasons. There are all sorts of reasons people were moving. That's also supposed to be a no-no, I believe. But, there were just, I guess, just stuff over the years that I picked up that would say to me, you're not telling me the truth about why you're moving.
Is it one more y'all heard?
I mean, for me, Bernard, the data that the administration pulled told the story. So those 900 and some students, the vast majority of them are Caucasian, and the vast majority of them are not on free and reduced lunch. And so those two trend lines, I mean, it tells the story. 2008 was that big flood. We lost a lot of students just because of housing and stuff. They had to go live somewhere else besides the flood zone. A lot of those students didn't end up coming back, but we still lose. The number one place where our students go is to the Marian Homeschool Program. I would say that has a very strong religious base to it, which is absolutely fine if that's the reason that they're going. But if they're going because they don't want to be with this student or this population or that population, that's, and again, I think that's where that code word stuff is coming from.
I'm trying to come
I'm
up-
gonna cut to this short. I'm gonna cut to this short. One of it is, they say Cedar Rapids is a urban school district.
Yes.
Also, it became an urban school district
Yeah,
because
that's
black
a
and brown
code.
kids showed up in large numbers.
Yeah.
Neighborhood schools usually a historical presentation for neighborhood, talking about safety. Grade school kids usually ain't endangered each other. It's grown folks who may come into the school that's a danger. Things like, words like safety. And do y'all, anything y'all know about the brown or gray divide? But do y'all anything know about the brown gray divide?
The brown and gray?
The brown gray divide, do you know what that is?
I haven't.
Okay, well, the long story, simple, as the amount of black people begin to increase in the education system, white people have already educated their kids, do not want to invest their money with them, and they find ways of not doing it. So part of it, and even coming from our state, basically, education is not a right. It needs to become a right. It needs to be enshrined in our state constitution. For allowable growth, and education needs to be, and shortfall would be make it law. Long term would be to put it in the Constitution, because actually, from all the study I did, education is not really a right. It's not really a right, so it needs to become a right. And long story short, I'm gonna be quiet. I suggest all y'all read a book called White Rage by Carol Armstrong. Just read it, and some of the stuff I tell you about, you see all the ways that white people figure out how not to go to school with us. They even have closed up school districts for 5 years just not to go to school with us. So
I get it.
So this is the problem. So my concern is, and again, I'm gonna ask a question: do you believe brand new schools will stop white flight? And then I'm gonna be done with it.
For me personally,
And this is not the reason, I don't, go ahead,
I'm sorry, it doesn't matter, you can't control what other people do.
That's true.
You can only control what you do within your community. It doesn't matter did they go somewhere else? Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about specifically. In St. Louis, that's where I'm from, you know, that Bernard.
Yeah.
In St. Louis, Missouri, you're familiar with University City, Washington University.
Yeah.
So University City is special, and there's more college professors per capita than anywhere, I think, in the whole country. I believe. I used to sub, working my way through school. At the school, the grade school there in Flint Park, it was old school with not a lot of resources. What's the difference? Every day, parents are coming in, teaching a class. That's the difference, right? So that's how you increase education. You have professionals. We're about co-college. We could do the same thing. You know what I mean? That's what we do. But you can't keep people from.
I wouldn't say that, but one of the things that the school district, one thing even Mr. Buck said, if it's a new building, people figure things are going on in there. This is the time to figure great things going, they want to stay. And I just wonder, my question to them, I know you can't control people, but my question to them, how do you think a new buildings are going to stop people from leaving?
So that's one.
But I already know that, because if you read White Rage, you know that every open enrollment, homeschooling, ain't none of that stuff new. Vouchers, ain't none of that stuff new. And basically, all those things were developed to get away from black and brown people. That's basically what they about. That's a church academies. Down south, the integrated schools, what the white people do, they went and they opened up church schools, so they would have to go to school with black. So all those things, the five
So
of
this
them.
is important, and Steve mentioned it.
Yeah, I said the five other things this state spends money on in terms of education. If you study history, you learn what they originated for. I'm not gonna take up no more. I'm not gonna take up no more time.
I don't think that there was ever, in all of the priorities that we ever talked about during our committee process, that stopping white flight was the reason why we should engage in the conversation at all. Building new schools has nothing to do with reversing this white flight. It is not. It's about maintaining our infrastructure. It's about preserving a quality instructional program. It's about doing what's right for our community. What happens to people and what choices they make after new schools are placed in our community is their choice. But it is not a design plan to reverse anything that has occurred in the last 10 years. I just don't want anyone to walk away thinking that this is the reason we're engaging in this conversation, because it's not.
Well, I heard part of it, that is part of the reason that with the kids going to Linn-Mar and college community and the $6 million that goes with them.
There is a lot of
That's what
that.
I heard, so.
Yeah, so I would add
If
that.
that continues, you know, and the $6 million still goes, how does that impact this community?
I would say as a school board, I mean, we're trying to make sure that we can live within our means, and that means is getting tighter and tighter every year. So every time, you know, that one of those students goes, it's $6,000, $7,000, that's a big hit on our own kids, right? And so this is one of the things, the new buildings, when we go out and we talk to folks, we talk to the realtors, there are people, this isn't everybody by any means, but there are people that say, this is impressive. If I live in that area that's close to Linn-Mar, but it's also Cedar Rapids, and I have a choice, we have good programs in both districts, but I see this brand new building over there, and I can go there for no money, just like I can go to Cedar Rapids schools. That might be important to me. I bought one of those new houses, you know, out in the suburbs or whatever, and I like that stuff. But other people, that's not what they're about. I mean, like my wife and I years ago, we chose to live in an older neighborhood. It's from the 60s. We wanted our kids to experience the full range of students from all walks of life. So they went through Erskine Elementary, and they went to McKinley Middle School, and then they went to Washington High School. And they had an amazing experience because of the diversity and the richness of all that. That was intentional on our part as parents. So we made a different choice than some folks. We could have probably gone out and bought a new house somewhere out in the suburbs, but we chose not to do that. So again, whole lot of different rights, but the money is definitely important.
To finish off what you asked, code word, I'd say the most often one was violence.
Violence.
That I heard, but a lot of them you had to read between the lines, and But I think that was easy to read.
Well, at least you recognize them, so
Yeah,
thank you.
right, yeah.
Okay, we're gonna need to kind of try to wrap up. You know, one of the things that I don't know if you have in the report, but you threw up that achievement gap as, so you open that door.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if there's anything in your report beyond what you presented that talks about the plan for the achievement gap and how you're gonna develop that.
So the plan, so this is
That-
just
that
the
in writing
facilities.
is in your plan?
So this is the facilities part, right?
Right,
So,
you all put up the achievement gap. In
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
facilities presentation.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and that goes back to the district's strategic plan, and one is the story. So we don't do a very good job about talking about what really is exciting in Cedar Rapids and what's working. We also, as we said, haven't been fully honest with ourselves and everyone else, I don't think, about that gap and that achievement struggle that's been going on for years in this district, and other districts too. I mean, I don't want to say it's all Cedar Rapids. The workforce, we're working really hard to make sure that the staff that we have are great staff, that they're engaged, that they feel good about the work they're doing. And right now, the majority of them, I forget the exact number, but 75–80% of them, they love being here in Cedar Rapids, but they're struggling a little bit right now in terms of morale and things. And whether that has to do with, a lot of it is related to substitute teachers. We're not able to get, and not just us, a lot of the area metro schools, but it's tougher because some of the behaviors that we're experiencing in our schools are a little bit tougher at times, so we can get into that discussion. Whatever it is, we've got that struggle. We've got some older buildings, we've got heating and cooling issues. So we can talk about workforce. We also, in the workforce, one of the goals in this and why we've hired people like Rod Dooley and folks in the administration is to get out there, and we need to be recruiting, and not just recruiting from the outside, a variety of people from different backgrounds, but growing from within our own. So we've told Dr. Buck and Rod Dooley and others, how do we develop students from different backgrounds to be interested in becoming teachers and going into professions that will help kids that will be more likely to stay in our school district. If we bring somebody in from Atlanta, Georgia, that's never been to Iowa before, and we recruit them here, which we've done, and then they stay for 3 years, does that do us any good for our kids? Or can we try and help get kids interested? There's some great people that are in this room, I see them, that are doing amazing things with our youth, and if we can continue that push and be more intentional about it, that's what we want to try to do. We want more people that look like our students across the board in our schools. So that's workforce. Learning, we can do a better job of teaching the kids. There are kids that, yeah, well, they're, you know, with No Child Left Behind, I'm just going to say, No Child Left Behind, we used to have all kinds of shop programs and skills trades programs and things. No Child Left Behind, take the test, got rid of all that stuff because it didn't matter. The test is what mattered, and that was math and reading and science. That stuff was what was being measured. And so a lot of those things sort of went away. We have students that go to Kirkwood, get an AA degree in engineering tech. They do nursing programs now and all kinds of different things that we're doing. The Johnson STEAM Academy, the Kenwood Leadership Academy, all kinds of neat hands-on work, and we're growing those programs so we can do better with learning. Intercultural mindset is key. So again, as our district has diversified racially, ethnically, and also more students coming from poverty backgrounds, our staff needs to be able to interact and understand and collaborate with those students from different backgrounds. And so intercultural mindset, some folks in this room too have been part of that. Rod Dooley and others have taken the lead on that, and we're working with every one of our staff on going through a process of understanding that, having intentional conversations. I don't know, as a principal, have you gone through that, the intercultural mindset? You want to? Some people probably know and others might.
I don't know enough to
Okay.
to share a lot. Like I have training coming up.
You have it coming up, okay, awesome. So we're intentionally pushing people in the district level to be able to have those frank and sometimes difficult discussions about culture and mindset and that. And then the last thing is the facilities, and we've gone through that whole conversation. So those are kind of the 5 big pictures, and you can see, I hope, that a lot of those things have to do with making sure that every child succeeds in this district, that they're all ready to go beyond high school and succeed in whatever it is. If they go into four-year college, two-year college, the trades, the military, whatever it is, we want them to be ready for what they want to do and what their parents and families, are encouraging them to do. So we're not there yet, but we're working on it.
So let's talk about next steps and timeframe.
Yeah. So next steps. So in terms of the facilities plan, we have a board meeting on Monday. And so as early as Monday, the district could vote, the school board could vote on the facilities plan. And so that will be out there. If we feel like we need more discussion, if there's new information that's coming to us that we haven't heard already that might make a difference, and we want to get into it a little bit more.
Because this is a vote that's taken at the meeting.
It's at a public board meeting.
Public board meeting, what time?
5:30 at the ELSC, which is the School Administration Building out on Edgewood Road, out by Ellis Park.
So anybody here is welcome to attend.
I got
Absolutely. Yeah.
If the weather would be bad, when would you give out the notice that the meeting would be canceled? Because it's supposed to snow. I'm not saying it's gonna stop the food.
It's at 5:30.
It's at
5:30.
It's at 5:30.
It's at 5:30, but if the
So
weather.
if something happens, Bernard, and we have to cancel, just like with the schools, multiple hours ahead of time, if it looks like a blizzard's coming,
Okay.
it'll be all over the media and on the district website, and, yep,
Can I ask a question?
yep.
So, now you've listened, you've asked some questions. When you walk out that door, what's honestly gonna be in your mind? Is it gonna be same old dog and pony show, different version? Or are you gonna say something other than that? What's going on in your heads?
I'll just be honest, I feel that there's a lot that isn't being said. Like, just from the information that I've heard today, that it seems like there's a lot of information that's being put to us, but then there isn't a lot of specifics other than the timeline.
Okay.
So that's pretty much.
Well, then I would, and I'm sorry, I could talk a lot more if you like. I mean, they put us on a limit.
I think.
Limited, we've already gone past.
Yeah, I don't, here's what I wanna get at. We can't answer it all. I wanna know what's rolling through your head. I wanna see this successful because all our kids are gonna prosper or be hurt, our grandkids. And the city itself, it's all involved. Go ahead.
Yeah, he's been trying to get a question in.
I hear all this talk about buildings, and that's all good, and building and restructuring and everything. Who are we gonna have teaching these kids that really wanna teach them? Cause I worked at Wash, and some of the stuff I seen that made me sick to the stomach. It's like all this money I see coming through the door every day and all these different programs that they're asking the parents that are already poor to help support the back. My son got to wear dirty, used stuff to go out and perform, and to the point he quit playing because I watched them pick and choose who they want to play. That's damaging.
Yep.
That's damaging to a kid.
Yep.
And if that's the stuff that's going on in these schools, and I've heard his coach tell me to my face, your son ain't no superstar. And I said, well, maybe it's because he got a coach that don't believe in him.
Yep.
And see, it's very damaging, the things I've seen, the little time I was there was more than enough to make me want to shout. But the thing about it is, all this building and stuff, that's cool. But when you uproot kids, just like you uproot your family, who gonna be there to make their transition to these new schools understandable so that they don't panic?
Yep.
So that they don't come home upset and not wanting to talk because Mrs. Johnson don't tell them they doing good in school like Miss Elderly did or whoever, whatever. Those are a lot of the things that goes into that planning. Because I heard a teacher tell a student in the hallway right in front of me, he was acting out because he had a problem at home. He later told me, she said, I don't give a damn if you get this or not. I still get paid the same. And I turned around and told her, I said, what's your name, ma'am? She tried to hide a tag. So I went in and told them. They said, oh, we'll check into it, but they didn't never do nothing to the teacher.
Yeah.
So I asked them every day, what did y'all do to her? Because she is one of the reasons a lot of these kids are not getting what they need.
Yep.
I want to come very clear on that as you say that. And I tell you, that is an attitude that is in our school district.
Yep.
But that attitude has many colors to it too.
Yes.
And I don't want this to go back and forth on a race issue or white, black, or what it is. But that attitude is that attitude that I believe the district and few people in the district are trying to work on. But that doesn't come with just a single color, for sure. And I'm a witness to it.
I want to piggyback on that too. I want to say, and Al and I were having a conversation back here, and the important thing we got to remember, if all of us obviously are here because we're invested, but what are you doing when you walk out of here? Because this is why we have to vote in 2018. We're talking all this smack at what's going on. We can point the fingers at these guys all day long, and I will. I'll point at you. But I have to point at myself too, and I have to ask, what am I doing to talk to the neighbor next to me about this? And that's kind of why I showed up tonight. And I want to say this about facilities. This is another thing we were talking about, and it does affect somebody's learning. And I'll just use a little example of myself growing up as a black kid. And I, for whatever reason, I was pretty smart, and so I was always around these white people. Always in class with these white people, and I was a white friend. And I remember my mom used to let me go after school over to my friend Brian Berg's house in Rock Thomas, and they lived in a rich neighborhood. And for whatever reason, that made me want to try harder. Like, I was like, dang, they got nice. Well, how do they do that? Well, they can't be better at math than me. They can't be better at science than me. And it was that environment. I have to go home to my poor house, but every day I got to hang around these kids, and it inspired me to want to be better. So I believe facilities do make people better. They do make you want to try harder. And I was one that did it in somebody's house because they had a better bedroom than me, and they had better stuff than me, and I wanted that stuff. So that's a fact. It is what it is. So whatever we do, and Al's right, it's not obviously colors on the table. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, but this ain't about just white people attacking black people. We're attacking ourselves. So don't sugarcoat it. Don't sugarcoat
I wasn't sugarcoating.
No, I'm not saying you just generally
because
speaking.
I never said anything about race,
Right.
period. But what I was saying is who's gonna be there to comfort those kids through their transition from being at this school they've been in for 4 or 5 years to a school they don't know nothing about way across town.
Yeah.
And then who gonna make sure that they're getting home safe once they get off a bus and gotta walk 12 blocks?
Yeah.
What you
So
said,
all that stuff is important.
what you said is why I asked my question.
What's that?
What you just answered is why I asked my question. And what I'm getting at is, what gets said after, people know you're here tonight, you told some people you're coming tonight. And what you carry out of here, and how you answer that question to them has a piece of where we get, or where we don't get.
Yeah.
It's critical, and
I have
so.
a question.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I
Good.
just assumed that maybe I shouldn't have. Well, the students will be displaced or moved, so the staff and the teachers will too.
Yep.
Won't the teachers follow and create fellowship with the teachers at the other school? Are you gonna do that, right?
Here, I'll just very briefly, like I went through this process in a previous building, and it's very intentional planning. So as we, I mean, it's gonna be difficult conversations, you know, when you bring two different staffs together, or when you move people and then you bring them back together. You know, as Harrison will be one of those schools, because we will split and then we will come back even bigger with more people than what were there when we began. So it takes a strong person and a strong staff and that strong community to be able to say, here's where we were, here's how we can become even better, but it's gonna take all of those people together. So who cares about your kids, you know, when they're making that transition? I will tell you 120%, that's me. I mean, I don't want my kids to ever feel like they don't belong or that they're not important in that transition also. And so I think a key thing, and just speaking from Harrison's point of view, is as we transition to having a focus of leadership, is to include students in that conversation as well. So when we come from what used to be Harrison to no Harrison to back to Harrison, what does that look like for you as kids? What do you need from us, you know, to feel successful? How can we make this your school, not just the school that I used to remember?
When you combine 3 schools together, are you gonna rename the school?
I don't think that has not been decided.
Yeah, that hasn't been discussed.
There was a lot of discussion about carrying the past into the new school,
Which may or may
the
not.
best of the past. So that could very well be, but then you got 3 schools competing for one name. There's a lot of ways to do it. I think the most important thing to me is that for this to be successful, we all individually have to, and it may not be tonight, it may not be this year, but there's a point where we gotta say either trust or don't trust, and we gotta either say I'm in or I'm not in.
But you know what? I heard you saying about our kids being trained. What we really need to do this year, we really need to vote. Because, see, I used to work for like JTPA Prominent Jobs, and what we did was the stuff you're talking about. We trained kids to be able to go out, you know, to be employed, to understand things, you know, and they were getting, you know, there was money to help kids, you know. Then, maybe I shouldn't say this, but then the Republican Party squashed that, you know. So what's very important is if we can't just give lip service to what we want to do in Cedar Rapids, we need to vote in November. Agreed.
Agreed.
So hopefully more funds will come into the school system and take care of it. We're gonna need to wrap up. Do you all have any closing remarks?
Just to thank you all for coming out tonight, because this is just the tip of the iceberg. Once we decide to vote, Nancy and Mary and myself and the other 4 school board members decide to vote on this, whether it's Monday night or into February or whatever, when we vote on that, the real heavy lifting starts. So every one of those 21 elementary school neighborhoods, folks in the neighborhoods, people like yourself that are committed to kids, we need to all come together and have those discussions. What's best for our kids in these neighborhoods, in this school? How are we going to help the kids? How are we going to make sure that the services that are needed for that neighborhood are there for the kids and our families? So that's a lot of more conversation that's got to come. And so again, as Daryl said, getting out there and talking to folks about you have a voice in this, that's critical. I just want to say too, this isn't the first time being on the board that I've heard some of the stuff that you've brought up with your son and stuff. So there are things that you can go through, and I'm sure with the school district you heard, but you have 7 elected volunteer school board members here that ultimately, we have one employee that reports to us, and that's the superintendent, Dr. Buck.
That's who I talked to.
Okay, well, if there's something, I'm just going to say this, if there's something that you don't feel is right or equitable or something, I know that there's meetings that go on with NAACP. He's been willing, I think, to meet on a regular basis and stuff. But if that's not even working, come talk to one of us. I mean, you may not be comfortable talking to me directly, maybe you will. Nancy Humbles and Shelby Humbles are here on a regular basis, I know, and Nancy's on the school board. We have lots of different voices that will listen. We can't solve every problem, but it's better that we know that it's a problem and try and fix it. That's where all this stuff comes from. It's not just by accident.
So we're gonna encourage everybody here, you know, some of us need to get out to some of those school board meetings.
Yeah.
So we don't just have a one conversation.
Yeah.
When you get out to some of those school board meetings, we need to show our faces, we need to get our input there.
Yeah.
But we wanna thank these folks for coming out and sharing this tonight. We appreciate it. We have some water, anybody wants some water?